In this episode of Heads and Tails, we peel back the story of one of the greatest innovations in education this century, the rise and legacy of Teach First. Brett Wigdortz, founder and former CEO, shares his view on education inequality, advocates for greater funding in early years education, and takes us all on a journey from a very simple vision: great teachers change outcomes. We hope you enjoy. Welcome back to Heads and Tails. My name is Walter Carr. I'm one of the two founders here at Open Education. And today's episode is huge. I am genuinely so excited because we have on today's episode a bit of a celeb in the education world. And it's for very good reason I use that term. So on today's episode, we have the founder and former CEO of Teach First, Brett Wigdortz OBE. I'm certain we will have a great many number of ex-Teach Firsters beaming into this one. Now, for those of you who don't know, Teach First places graduates into schools within low-income communities, and the aim is to break the link between, educational achievement and socioeconomic background. His work with Teach First, set up in 2003, inspired the co-founding of many different organizations, Teach for All, a global network supporting similar models in, over 60 countries, as well as the Fair Education Alliance, a coalition of organizations working closely at the moment to bridge the education gap. Before launching Teach First in 2003, Brett worked as a strategy consultant with McKinsey & Company, and I'm going to touch upon those links between consultancy and teaching there. Earlier in his career, he worked as a journalist in Southeast Asia and in the development with Indonesian government on education policy. Fast forward a bit, in 2019, Brett co-founded Tiney, his new venture with Ed Reed and John Newbold, a company creating, in his words, affordable, high-quality childcare, empowering a new generation of childminders. Brett, a very, very big welcome to Heads and Tails.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get to all of that. A transformational teacher changes a life. That, to me, seems to be at the heart of your mission with Teach First. Good teachers change outcomes, right? Now, there's no doubt that through your work with Teach First, you have a pretty unique perspective, on understanding the ecosystem of teacher recruitment, the landscape of structural change, the value of educational innovation, and also how politics and education dovetail, perhaps well and also less well. We're going to come to all of that, at like breakneck speed. But I want to touch upon the last point, because let's go back, if you will allow me. It's 2000, it's early noughties. You have this man, Charles Clarke. For those watching, I have a very nerdy set of education top trumps. He was your Secretary of State for Education. Likeability 4 out of 10, effectiveness 7 out of 10. Take us then back through the window of politics and education in 2002. What were those circumstances in the time you set up Teach First?
Sure. So 2002, if you go back in time, I think one thing people need to remember, and often don't, is actually schools were in a much more difficult position than they are now. I know we complain about lots of things, and there's lots of things that we want to improve, rightly. But I do think there's been massive improvements since 2002. As part of this McKinsey project we did looking at how education could improve in London, I visited lots of schools where maybe 10% of the kids were getting 5 good GCSEs, where you'd see kids just roaming the corridors without much purpose. I remember meeting a head teacher who said his goal for the kids was the young people in the school was to keep them out of prison and off the street. There seemed a lack of purpose in lots of comprehensive schools in the capital. Obviously there were some great schools and all sorts of, wonderful examples of brilliance. But I think many people would view the idea at that point that if you were a smart kid, you'd want to send a child to a grammar school or a private school on scholarship, because comprehensive schools weren't places that smart young people would be able to get a good education. As a generalization, I'm not saying that for every school, but that was a generalization.
So then at McKinsey, there you were working as a marketing grad, the analytical brain that you had as a consultant. What were you trying to fix?
So I had done a lot of work on the war for talent, how organizations could attract the best talent. And I got on this project, how businesses could help education in London, because this had been Tony Blair's big focus was education, education, education. For those of you who remember, who studied politics, that was what he stood for in 1997, I think, when he ran. And he hadn't done much up to then, and there was massive problems. And businesses were saying, we can't hire good school leavers because there's not enough who can work for us, you know? So we looked at how can you improve these schools? We came up with all these ideas and quickly realized the big way to impact schools was get additional excellent teachers and leaders into these schools. And those were the levers for change.
I have many friends, colleagues, people who work with Oppidan who were teach firsters. You stood on a podium and you projected that view, which has now led to such huge educational innovation today. For those who don't know, can you just run through some of those early challenges you faced and perhaps an anecdote from like a really successful moment where you thought, my God, I think we're doing some work here?
Yeah, I mean, it was massive challenge, and I think it was much more likely that Teacherverse wouldn't succeed than would succeed. Sometimes when things work and they've been part of the system for over 20 years, people think this was just a given, and it definitely wasn't. We needed to get, first of all, the big thing was people thought, top graduates would not be interested in teaching in low-income comprehensive schools. I remember meeting the head of careers at Oxford who said he had 5 of his leavers teach in comprehensive schools nationally that year. And he said they all were interested for religious reasons, just to put in perspective. So I think it wasn't a given that a lot of talented people would want to teach in these schools. I think another problem was the training. There was a lot of questions. Could you train people and support them in a different sort of way rather than doing a year up front? Is there a different way to chop and change the training and get it really good quality? Would schools accept them? I think there was a lot of belief that schools wouldn't accept these people. And I think they only did accept them because they were so desperate at that point in 2002. Would the unions accept it? I think was a big question. And I think there was a lot of questions. Would the kids accept it? Young people in these schools, there was this belief that, I think, some of it was quite, trying to think of the right word for it. It was quite, classist maybe belief that, young people in some of these schools just wouldn't react well to teachers who had graduated from top universities, which I always thought was nonsense.
How did you get unions on board?
A lot of work. I had lots and lots of meetings with the unions at the time. And I think in some ways it was useful being an outsider, an American, because I had no background. And I basically just said, look, what are you guys worried about? What do you want? The main thing they wanted to make sure was that our teachers had the same paying conditions as other teachers, that we weren't paying them more or less than other teachers, which was fine. I think they also saw a problem of real teacher shortage. I think, sometimes crises give opportunities to make change happen. And I think the education system was in such a crisis in 2002, people were open for new opportunities.
Lovely. Put on your battle armor because I'm going to provide you a healthy challenge that I suspect is what the unions might have said. So here we go. Stay with me, okay? So the critic says, a posh Durham grad, can't think who that might be, thinks they can make a difference, right? Now they come in without any true context on the sensitivities of often, very underprivileged areas. They have perhaps a surface level vocational interest. They do a term, maybe they do 2 years, but they go off to JP Morgan after that time. And all that effort that you put into training and that 70% first year teaching time, they become an NQT, they then go off to a different corporate life. What was your response to that, I suppose, healthy challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I'd break it down. There's, I guess, a few challenges in there. I mean, to start with, the challenge, a top posh Durham or whatever graduate wouldn't be able to teach in a low-income school or work with the kids there. I think that's a challenge I'd just attack up front and say, well, no, some graduates wouldn't and some graduates would, and we're going to select the ones who would, and we're going to have a selection process that will find the people who have the leadership ability, the collaboration. We looked for respect, humility, empathy, not people who are just going to come in and say, I'm a top Durham graduate and I'll tell you guys what to do, obviously, but can work with the kids. And I think there's something quite weird saying young people from a certain background won't work well with another teacher who has a different background or, is, a top university graduate. I think there's a weird thing from that. I think you have to select the right people and you have to train them and support them well. But I think you can solve for that if you find the right people and support them well. I think for the other point, is this a lifetime career? I would get it from a few points of view. First of all, I kind of think it's something weird that in education, people think once you go into teaching, if you don't go then teach for 40 years and get clapped out when you turn 60 something, you're a failure. And I just think that, most careers don't look at their career that way. And I think my mom was a teacher for over 40 years. My brother is teaching. He'll probably teach for 40 years plus. And I think those people are absolutely instrumental to the education system. But I don't think it's necessarily good for schools or for kids to have people who are only teaching there for 40 years. I think having some people in and out is a good thing. And I think most careers, most professions look at it as a success. People come for a few years, do it, maybe leave, come back, move around a bit. And the big goal for Teach First wasn't just that they teach for a few years, but that this would be a lifetime commitment they would make to the profession. So, first of all, statistically, we can show our teachers would stay longer than other teachers because, a lot of teachers drop out after doing PDC and never teach. Ours would teach for at least 2 years in low-income schools, and most of them would teach much longer. But the bigger thing is this movement of wonderful, great, talented people who really care about low-income schools and care about the young people there. So currently at Teach First, we have so many ambassadors who are leaders of amazing charities, created social enterprises. We have like 6 MPs now. We have tons of civil servants whenever I see them who are, really understanding the needs of young people in these schools and are so much better for those jobs. We have people all over the place who are making a massive impact, some in education and teaching, but some outside.
Lovely. We're going to come to Brett Wigdortz, the mentor, in a second, but just one perhaps final question. I may get overexcited, but one final question on Teach First that perhaps puts it into context today. So part A is, I guess, to what extent do you think the mission you set out to achieve all those years ago has been achieved or has progressed in the way that you wish it had? And then looking into the future, teacher recruitment remains one of the hardest challenges today. So what would you like to see new to continue the legacy of the work that you're doing? So yeah, part A and part B, if you may.
Yeah. So I would feel better about answering that 5 years ago than I do now. I feel, unfortunately, the education system seems to have moved backwards a bit the last few years, since COVID especially. And the gap, and I just say that just looking at the numbers, the gap between wealthier and poorer kids has started to increase over the last few years after many years of decreasing. There's no question London has improved a lot. I think overall national education has improved a lot, and I think you could look at global rankings and there's lots of ways you can look at it, but it would be difficult to say education in England isn't better now than it was 20 years ago. But unfortunately, one of the core things we were looking at, which is how do you ensure lowest income kids get the same or better quality of education than wealthier kids, that was improving for a while, and I feel it's gone backwards a bit. And I think, obviously there's some teacher recruitment challenges now, which are very reminiscent of what we saw 20 years ago.
So you may be sitting down with Bridget Phillipson one-on-one and giving your view, but what would you say to her? Give me the Brett Wigdortz playbook for the next 10 years.
She hasn't asked me for my views, so I'm open to chat to her. But I think there's a lot. I mean, look, it's a difficult. I think you have to look in around. I think you have to prioritize go back to the original war for talent, mentality. Obviously, there's a lot of options people have to work part-time or from home in other careers, and it's more and more difficult for education to compete with that. One of the things where my tiny hat on it, which we'll talk about, is we're starting to work with schools, helping them build small childcare facilities in the schools to help bring people back from paternity and maternity leave. And I think that's just one example, that gets staff back. I mean, there's something about the way you view teachers and the way you look at teacher development. I feel like a lot of that's been cut over the last 5-10 years, and it's not as prioritized as it used to be. I mean, I think what I would say with teaching, money is important, and you need to pay a proper salary, but it's much more than that. It's looking at it as a proper profession. It's really thinking about how you can compete with lots of other opportunities people have.
Lovely. There is so much to say, but I'm going to crack on. You have been advising, you have been changing young people's lives for a great many years, both I would say as children and as young graduates. So my question on my sheet here is one piece of advice you'd have for someone developing a career in education, but I want to frame that around obviously your Teach First stuff. So you were preparing highly, I'd say inexperienced, but vocationally committed career changers or young grads to work in, I would say, 2 very hard circumstances. So perhaps a lesson in mentorship, like how do you coach? How do you support? What are the things that other business leaders can learn from you in terms of how you advise those grads coming through?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's two things I think of. One is the first thing I say to anyone who wants to get involved in education is you have to like young people and you have to enjoy working with young people and children. And, for our childminders, very small children. And, if you don't, and I often would say this to some of our teachers who are struggling, if you enjoy that, then you could figure out the other stuff. If you don't enjoy that, this is a really bad career for you. So I'd always say that's the first thing you should think about. Is that something that excites you? Is that something that, you wake up in the morning thinking, yes, I want to work with young people and I want to help them develop and I want to lead them and help them progress. And that gets you motivated. Then obviously it's a great profession for you. On mentoring, I always, any organization I'm involved with or any groups of people, I'm always say, try to go back to values, vision, and mission as really important. And I think often schools, the best schools have this. I always think what the best schools have in common, what the best educational organization have in common, they all have very strong values. And, it's one reason I think religious schools often do well because they have strong values. But, you have other schools that are not religious, but you go in and you know what the values are of the schools, the young people know, the adults know, and that's a real, and same for organizations. That's a real powerful glue. We try to do that also at Teach First. Similarly, with vision and mission, like you have to know where you're going to or what are you trying to achieve. And if you get a group of people who have like really similar, understanding of what their vision is, mission, and similar values, then it's a very powerful group.
That's top of the advice list for anyone listening. So let's fast forward then 2019. You would have thought, 15, 16 years running Teach First at the coalface, bit of a break. Not for this man. You come together with two mates, two friends, two colleagues, and you start Tiney. We talk about values, vision, mission. Tiney is addressing the challenges that face early years provision. Part one, what makes a good caregiver, a good childminder? And two, what is the mission going forward for Tiney?
Yeah. So, I mean, what makes a good childminder, again, going back to my previous one, is you have to like working with small kids. Obviously, if you don't like working with small kids, it's a very bad job. If you do like working with small kids and find them really fun and, find the idea that you're a massive influence in these children's lives, because if you're working with a 3 or 4-year-old, you've been with them a quarter of their life or more, and you're a bigger influence than anyone except their parents. And, that can be an incredibly motivating, exciting job. When I left Teach First, I really was looking at education as a whole, and my 15 years at Teach First made me realize one mistake we're making nationally is we're spending not enough energy and focus and money on younger kids. And all the brain science of the last 20 years, all my time visiting schools says if you can get to kids younger and you can actually work with small children and ensure that those synapses are developing in the right way and that they're developing really good early years understanding and they're school ready by the time they're 4 or 5, then, half the battle's won. It actually makes primary and secondary schools job much, much easier. But it's not as much a focus of policy and focus as much as other areas are. And often early years educators are for some reason seen is less prestigious as older kid educators, which is a huge mistake. As anyone knows, it's much more difficult, I think, in many ways to work with younger children and much smaller ratios and everything. And that's why we focused on childminding is a way to grow the number of educators of young children as probably the best way to do it, I think.
Love it. And it's obviously much more multifaceted than a sort of simply binary yes or no, but is it in response to the deficiencies you've seen in nurseries, or is it giving parents more flexibility in allowing that early years provision to be more dynamic?
So there's a few reasons. I think, first of all, there's a massive shortage of early years care in this country and in most countries. Nurseries are good for some kids and necessary. Problems with nurseries is, for all sorts of reasons, they pay really badly, and they almost have to. Because if you think you need one educator for every few children, and they have all these overheads and other costs, it's very hard, for them to pay well. The only way they could pay well is by charging parents a fortune. So maybe very high-end nurseries can do that, but that can't be a mass market thing. Why I got into childminding is because if you're a childminder, you're still an early years educator. You still follow EYFS and you're safeguarding and inspected and everything. But you get to keep most of the money. usually working from home. You don't have all the overhead. So you could actually make a lot more as a childminder than as a nursery educator. And it's basically running a micro business. But many of these early years educators are good with kids, but not as good at running these micro businesses, which is why I thought that's the area to focus on. And I'd also say for parents, it's more flexibility, and for kids, especially under threes, there's a lot of evidence that says child minding is a better place. It's less formal, and it's mimics a family atmosphere a bit more for younger children.
Love it. We're sort of back end of this podcast, so we're almost done. And I have a couple of questions on controversial opinions, so get those front and center. But, we've gone macro, we've talked political, we've talked broader challenges. But I want to take our listeners behind the curtain of your to-do list. So you're calling from Amsterdam, I believe. You have a seriously busy timetable, diary. But what's the challenge in your in-tray that you're most excited about right at the moment? Here we are, the next 2 days. What is a leader like you doing to push forward their business?
Well, so I'm focused on Tiney most of my time now, and my main focus now is how do we recruit more childminders? I think there's an awesome, possible, growth in early years care. The government's paying for more of it. What I'm dealing now is dealing with 150 local authorities who all are funding childcare in different ways. As you might know, childcare has now become much more of a government-funded area over the last 2 years. And so we're working through that. And then we're working through new strategies to recruit more childminders, because there's a massive shortage of childminders out there. So if any of your listeners are excited to have a great career as an educator from their home and make a good income, give me a call and we can help them set up.
We certainly will. We're a big believer in what you do. You have traversed the landscape of education in the UK. You've also provided the genesis for so many different organizations like you. So the influence is long and lasting. Can I ask you maybe for 2 controversial opinions that you're proud to hold that you think you'd like other people to know about?
Well, one would be, I think the government should spend more money per child in early years than they do for secondary schools. And currently it's reversed. I think, I don't remember the ratio exactly, but every young person gets more spent on them in secondary school each year, secondary school, than they do in early years. And that should be reversed if you're looking at the science. So that'd be one controversial opinion. Another, I don't know if it's controversial anymore, but I do wonder, looking at universities and just having done a bit research recently, if universities are adding as much value as they should be, especially for the way the job market's changing.
Do you think the value of the UK brand of university is as pervasive today? Do you think, how do you look at that higher education landscape?
It's we have more great universities, I think, any country in the world except for the United States, if you look at the rankings. But obviously many of them are hurting. There's a big tail end of degrees, I think, that probably aren't worth the cost or the time that young people are putting in. And I think there are a lot of young people out there who are spending a lot of time, a lot of money on degrees and certifications that aren't worth the paper they're printed on. And we're kind of taking advantage of these kids, I think.
Well, you've done secondary education. You're now addressing early years. Maybe after that you can do higher education. I'm Brett Wigdortz. The memoir will come out. Maybe it's already out. But when you stop looking forward and look backwards, you will, I'm sure, write a very popular best-selling memoir on lessons that can be learned in education. And that memoir will share anecdotes, I'm sure. I just wonder whether there's one anecdote or one insight from your time across either of your many businesses that you thought, God, this really, what I'm doing is fulfilling my kind of ikigai, that idea of leadership and values and mission all coming together. Is there one anecdote you can share that encompasses that sense of impact?
Yeah, and I wrote a book in 2012, which I have to update. So it's probably still on Amazon if people want, called Success Against the Odds. Anyone can read. But look, the moments, probably the most exciting moments of my life was when we had everyone together. We would often get Leeds Arena, and we'd have our new Teach First teachers, people had just completed their first year who had come back to work with the new teachers and finish their PGDE. And we'd have a lot of alumni ambassadors there. I think we had about 4,000 people working together in the Leaves Arena. And you'd go around and you just hear these amazing educators who are like bubbling up against each other. And it felt like a real movement of educators who were affecting real change for the lives of, thousands and thousands of young people across the country. And it was goosebump creating every year.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, on that happy note, there is such movement in you and what you're doing, and we look out for the success of Tiney happening and to come too. Thank you for everything you've done with Teach First. I know I say that to many listeners here today and in my office. And Brett, thank you very much for appearing on this episode of Heads and Tails.